Hey everybody, welcome to Dan Bullman Photography. Now since I posted my video review on the Canon FTb film camera, I've been getting a lot of messages from my audience on how to use this camera, particularly how to shoot with the built-in light meter. So I wanted to do a couple videos just to clarify some things about the camera and how to use it that weren't in my initial review. And in this video I'm going to show you how to use the built-in light meter. So just to give you some basics about the light meter in the Canon FTb, basically what it does is it takes a measurement of the light coming in through the lens, and it's coupled with the ASA or ISO of the dial, the aperture, and the shutter speed. So it takes a combination of your camera settings and the light that's coming in to give you an idea if you're making a proper exposure. So how can you actually tell what information the light meter is giving you to make sure you make good photos that aren't too overexposed or bright or too underexposed or dark? Basically, in the right-hand side of your viewfinder, you'll see two needles. Now, one of them looks like a small circle. That's the aperture needle. When you adjust your aperture, the needle moves either up or down. The other needle is coupled with your shutter speed and the ISO dial. So when you adjust either of those two things, the needle will either move up or down. And the needle also moves based on the available light coming into the lens. So if you have your light meter turned on and you point it at a bright light source, it'll change, or a darker source where there's less light, it'll also change. So basically, in order to make a proper exposure, you want to match these two needles up in the viewfinder. If the index needle, or the needle that measures light, shutter speed, etc., is over or above the aperture needle, then your image will come out too bright. And if it's below where the aperture needle is, then your image will be underexposed or too dark. So in order to make a proper photo, you just need to match those up. So what happens if you get a little red dot in your viewfinder when you're using the meter? Well, that just means that your exposure settings are so far off that the light meter can't actually read it anymore. So try either adjusting the aperture a lot or the shutter speed, just to try to get it back to where the needle is inside that coupling range. Now if you turn your light meter on and you notice that the needles are not moving at all, then your battery might be dead and you might need to replace it. So in order to check the power level of your battery, you can actually flip the switch on the top of the camera down to the C logo. And you actually have to hold it there, and then you set your shutter speed to 1,000th of a second, or 1,000 on the dial, and you set your ISO to 100. And then you look at the needle. If the needle goes above or around the black line, that's the index thing on the bottom of the viewfinder, then you have enough power. If it's sitting below that or at the bottom, then your battery might be dead and you might need to replace it. Now, this camera actually uses batteries that are not in production anymore. Originally, when this camera was manufactured in the 70s, this took a 1.3 volt mercury battery, which have since been discontinued and I believe are made illegal. So, but there are replacement options. I believe WeinCell, they make a replacement battery for this that you can use. So in order to replace the battery, you take a coin, I usually use a quarter, and you twist this on the side, this button here on the side, open, and that's your battery compartment. And then you just put the battery in there and you're good to go. Now, definitely when you're putting the battery in, make sure not to touch the contacts on the bottom with your fingers. Just handle it by the sides, because that you could get residue on there that prevents it from making proper contact. So I just want to give some pointers on other things to think about while you're shooting photos, because just matching up those needles in the viewfinder might not be enough to make a good picture. So one tip I always tell people is to keep your shutter speed to 1/60th of a second or faster, meaning higher, so like between 1/60th and 1/1000th of a second on the camera. If you're shooting at, say, 1/30th or 1/15th and you're shooting handheld, there's a good chance that you're going to get camera shake and you're going to get blurry photos from that. So if you're struggling to get your shutter speeds to up to a 60th of a second, try opening up the aperture a little bit more. Move it to 1.8 or f2. And see if that'll give you enough light to make a proper photo. One other handy rule to know about when shooting outdoors during the daytime is what's called the sunny 16 rule. And this rule basically says that if you are on a bright sunny day outside, so it's like high noon, the sun is blaring, clear skies, set your camera to f16 for the aperture, and then make your shutter speed the reciprocal of the ISO. So what that means is, say you're shooting with a 400 ISO film, then make your shutter speed 1/400th of a second. Now sometimes the ISO of your film doesn't match the shutter speed settings that you have on your camera. If it's off by a little bit, don't worry about it. So say you're shooting with a 400 ISO film, if you're shooting at 1/500th of a second, or 1/250th for that matter, it's probably not going to make a huge difference. If you're worried about it, then maybe you can open up to f13. Now if you're shooting on a cloudy day, I would just say open up by a stop or two. I will usually shoot at like f8 or f11 and keep the other settings when it's a little bit cloudier or not as much light out. So that's basically it. That's how you use your Canon FTb light meter. I hope this video was helpful for you guys and maybe cleared up some questions that you had about the camera and how to use it and how to use the light meter, and just some basic settings to give you a good exposure when you're faced with normal shooting situations. So in all honesty, I don't use the light meter in this camera very often. I actually don't use it at all anymore. I had some bad results early on. I found that it wasn't really totally accurate. So I actually started metering with an app on my cell phone a lot. It's called Pocket Light Meter. And I use that for most situations, or a lot of times now I will just use the sunny 16 rule and set my camera up based on that. And I usually get good results, so I'm not too worried about the meter in the camera. But if you're dead set on using the meter in this camera or find that it'd be a helpful tool, then I recommend trying it out, see what kind of results you get. If anything was unclear, or if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below, or you can contact me through DM on Instagram. My handle is @DanBullman. You can also send me an email at danbullmanphotography@gmail.com. So anyhow, if you like these videos, please subscribe by clicking on the red box next to my head, or by clicking on the subscribe link down below. We'll have some new content coming out soon, a lot of film stock reviews and camera reviews, so keep your eye out on that, and hopefully you'll enjoy. We'll see you next time. This has been Dan Bullman Photography. Peace.